My name is Franklin Moore. I'm 67 years old, and just hours after surgery, while I was still lying there in pain, tubes running out of my arm, my entire body aching from being cut open, my own son-in-law looked down at me and said, "You're a burden. We have our own lives." Let that sink in for a moment. Hours, just hours after they wheeled me out of the operating room, my daughter, my own flesh and blood, stood there silent. She didn't defend me. She didn't tell him to shut his mouth. She just stood there, staring at her phone like I wasn't even in the room. And in that moment, staring up at that sterile hospital ceiling, listening to the beep of machines that were monitoring whether I'd make it through the night, I made a decision. A quiet one. A powerful one. I picked up my phone, I booked private care, I arranged my own recovery, and then, with fingers that were still shaking from anesthesia, I stopped every single financial payment I'd been sending them. Every single one. 3 hours later, my phone was exploding. 29 voicemails. 29. The panic in those messages was something I'll never forget, but we'll get to that. First, if this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt used, dismissed, or taken for granted by the people you've sacrificed everything for, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know there are still people out there who understand what loyalty and respect actually mean. Now let me tell you who I really am, because understanding that will help you understand why what happened cut so deep. My name is Franklin Moore, and I'm not some fragile old man who needs coddling. I'm not someone who sits around waiting for handouts or sympathy. I built a construction business from absolutely nothing, from the ground up, literally. I started with a tool belt, a beat-up truck, and a willingness to outwork anyone who got in my way. I poured concrete in 100-degree heat. I framed houses in freezing rain. I worked 16-hour days, came home covered in dust and blood from cuts I didn't even notice until I saw the stains on my shirts. I built that company one contract at a time, one client at a time, one reputation at a time. And I didn't do it for glory. I did it because that's what men in my family do. We provide, we build, we make sure the people we love never have to worry about a roof over their heads or food on the table. That's the code I lived by. That's the code I thought I was passing down. I've been financially responsible my entire life. I've never asked anyone for anything. Not a loan, not a favor, not a bailout. When times got tough, I tightened my belt and worked harder. I didn't cry about it. I didn't blame the economy or bad luck. I handled my business. And when I finally sold that company and retired, I thought I'd done it right. I'd set myself up. I had savings, I had investments, I had security, but more than that, I had pride. The pride of knowing I'd never been a burden to anyone. Until my own son-in-law looked at me, broken, in pain, vulnerable, and told me I was exactly that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about my daughter first, because none of this makes sense without understanding what she meant to me. I have one daughter, just one, and from the moment she was born, she was my entire world. I was there for everything, every single thing. I didn't miss a school play. I didn't miss a parent-teacher conference. I didn't miss a soccer game, a dance recital, or a science fair. When other dads were too busy or too tired, I was in the front row with a camera, cheering louder than anyone else. When she struggled with math in middle school, I sat with her every night at the kitchen table until she understood it. When she got her heart broken for the first time in high school, I held her while she cried and told her she deserved better. When she got into university, her dream school, I worked extra contracts to make sure she could go without drowning in debt. I was her protector, her provider, her biggest supporter, and she knew it. God, she knew it. We had a bond, a real one, the kind where you don't even have to say, "I love you," out loud because it's in every action, every sacrifice, every moment you show up. I thought that bond was unbreakable. I was wrong. Because when the moment came, when I actually needed her to stand up for me, to defend me, to show even a fraction of the loyalty I'd shown her for decades, she was silent. And that silence, that hurt more than anything her husband said. Let me tell you about him, the son-in-law, Because this man, this smiling, charming, smooth-talking man, was the beginning of the end. When my daughter first introduced him to me, I'll admit, I wanted to like him. I wanted to see what she saw. She was glowing. She was happy. And as a father, you want your daughter to be happy. You want to believe the man she's chosen is worthy of her. He had confidence, I'll give him that. He walked into my home, shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and told me all about his big plans. He was going to start a business. He was going to build something great. He had vision, he said, ambition. But here's the thing about ambition, it's worthless without work. And as time went on, I started seeing the cracks. The business never materialized. There were always excuses. The timing wasn't right. The market was tough. He needed more capital. He was networking and building connections, which apparently meant expensive dinners and golf outings, while my daughter worked overtime to keep them afloat. He was obsessed with appearances. The right car, the right neighborhood, the right restaurants. Everything had to look successful, even if the reality was falling apart behind the scenes. And then there was the entitlement. It was subtle at first, a comment here and there, a tone in his voice when he talked about what they deserved or what they should have, like the world owed him something just for existing. I saw it, I felt it in my gut, but I said nothing, because my daughter loved him and I didn't want to be the father who ruined her happiness. I didn't want to be the one who said, "I told you so." So I kept quiet and I watched. What I didn't realize at the time was that while I was watching him, he was watching me, watching my bank account specifically. You see, somewhere along the way, I became their safety net. Not because I offered, but because they needed one, and I was the easiest target. It started small. They were buying their first house, and they were a little short on the down payment. Could I help just this once? Of course I helped. That's what fathers do. Then it was the car. Something broke down, and the repair was more than they expected. Could I cover it, just until they got back on their feet? Of course, I covered it. Then it became a pattern, monthly transfers, just to help with bills, just to get through a rough patch, just until things turn around. Except things never turned around. The rough patches became permanent. The temporary help became expected. And here's the kicker, I didn't mind at first. I really didn't. I've always believed that if you have the means to help the people you love, you do it. You don't keep a scorecard. You don't hold it over their heads. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The gratitude disappeared. The thank yous stopped. The updates about how they were doing and what they were working toward, those vanished too. Instead, the requests became demands. The tone became expectant. It wasn't "Dad, could you help us?" anymore. It was "We need this by Friday." And the son-in-law, he started speaking for both of them. He'd send me messages outlining what they needed, when they needed it, and where to send it, like I was his personal ATM. My daughter would call occasionally, but even those conversations started feeling rehearsed, distant, like she was checking a box on a to-do list. I noticed, of course I noticed, but I told myself it was temporary. I told myself things would get better. I told myself that family was family, and you don't abandon family just because they're struggling. What I didn't understand yet was that they weren't struggling. They were comfortable living off my money while treating me like an inconvenience. And then came the surgery, the moment everything changed. I'd been having pain for months, sharp, stabbing pain in my abdomen that I kept ignoring because I'm not the type to complain. I'm not the type to make a fuss. But it got worse, bad enough that I finally went to the doctor, and after a series of tests, they told me I needed surgery, not optional, not let's wait and see, necessary. I called my daughter to tell her. I expected concern. I expected her to ask questions, to offer support, to tell me she'd be there. Instead, I got a hesitant pause. Then, "When is it scheduled?" I told her the date. Another pause. "Okay, we'll try to make it work." Try to make it work. Like I was asking them to attend a casual dinner party, not support their father through a major surgery. But I pushed down the hurt. I told myself they were busy. I told myself they'd come through when it mattered. The day of the surgery came. I checked into the hospital alone. I filled out the paperwork alone. I sat in the pre-op room alone, listening to the nurses prep me, staring at the clock, wondering if my daughter would show up. She did, eventually. An hour before, I was wheeled into the operating room. She walked in with her husband trailing behind her, both of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "How are you feeling?" she asked, barely making eye contact. "Nervous," I admitted, because I'm human. I was about to be put under anesthesia and cut open. Of course, I was nervous. The son-in-law sighed, audibly, like my nervousness was an inconvenience. "How long is this going to take?" he asked. Not "are you okay?" Not "is there anything you need?" Just "how long?" "A few hours," I said. He checked his watch, actually checked his watch, right in front of me. "We have plans later," he muttered. My daughter didn't correct him. She didn't tell him to shut up. She just nodded. And that was it. That was the extent of their support. A 15-minute visit filled with impatience and irritation, and then they left. They told me they'd check in later and walked out. I went into surgery alone. I woke up alone. And when I finally came to in the recovery room, groggy and disoriented, the first thing I saw was my daughter on her phone and her husband packing near the door. The nurse was checking my vitals when the son-in-law finally spoke. "So how long until you can go home?" I was still trying to form coherent thoughts. My throat was dry from the breathing tube. My body felt like it had been hit by a truck, and he was asking when I could leave. "They're keeping me overnight for observation," I managed to say. He groaned. "Overnight? Seriously?" My daughter glanced up from her phone. "Can't they just send you home with instructions?" I stared at her, my own daughter, the girl I'd stayed up with when she had nightmares, the girl I'd carried on my shoulders when her legs got tired, the girl I'd sacrificed everything for. And she was annoyed that I was being kept overnight for observation after major surgery. "The doctor thinks it's best," I said quietly. "Well, we can't stay," the son-in-law said. "We have our own lives. We have our own responsibilities." That's when he said it, the line that broke something inside me. "You're a burden." He didn't whisper it. He didn't sugarcoat it. He said it like it was a fact, like I was supposed to just accept it. "We have our own lives," he repeated. "We can't drop everything every time you need something." I looked at my daughter, waiting, hopping, praying she'd say something, anything. She didn't. She just stood there, staring at her phone, silent. And in that moment, lying in that hospital bed, pain radiating through my body, tubes in my arm, machines beeping around me, I realized the truth. They didn't love me. They loved what I provided. And the moment I needed something from them, the moment I stopped being useful and started being needy, I became expendable. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't cry or beg or try to explain how much those words hurt. I just nodded. "You're right," I said. "You have your own lives. You should go." They didn't need to be told twice. They were out the door in seconds, relief written all over their faces. And I was alone again, staring at the ceiling, listening to the beeping monitors. But this time I wasn't sad. I was clear. Crystal clear. I picked up my phone. My hands were shaking, partly from the anesthesia, partly from anger, but I managed. First, I called a private nursing service. I arranged for round-the-clock care for my recovery. I didn't need my daughter. I didn't need her husband. I'd pay professionals who actually gave a damn. Then I opened my banking app, and one by one, I canceled every automatic payment I'd set up for them. The monthly transfers, the bill payments, the emergency fund I'd been contributing to, all of it, gone. I didn't send a text. I didn't call to explain. I just cut them off. Because here's the thing, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I didn't need to. I removed my support. And I waited. It took 3 hours before my phone started ringing. The first call came from my daughter, I didn't answer. The second call came from the son-in-law. I didn't answer. Then the voicemails started pouring in. 1, 2, 5, 10. By the time I finally checked, there were 29 voicemails. 29. I listened to a few of them, just to hear the panic in their voices. The first ones were confused. Dad, did you mean to cancel the payment? Can you call me back? Then they got anxious. Dad, seriously, we need to talk. This is important. Then desperate. Dad, please, we have bills due. We need that money. Call me back, please. And finally, from the son-in-law, angry and accusatory. What the hell is this? You can't just cut us off without warning. We depend on that money. There it was, the truth, plain and simple. They didn't fear losing me. They feared losing the money. I didn't call back that night, or the next day. I let them sit in their panic. I let them realize what it felt like to be abandoned when you needed help, to be dismissed when you were vulnerable. It felt good. God help me, it felt good. By the second day, the messages changed tone completely. My daughter was crying in some of them. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have defended you. Please, can we talk? The son-in-law was less apologetic, but I could hear the fear in his voice. Look, I didn't mean it like that. I was stressed. We were both stressed. Can we just talk about this? Too little, too late. Because here's what they didn't understand. I didn't cut them off to punish them. I cut them off to protect myself. For years, I'd been enabling them. I'd been letting them use me because I thought that's what love looked like. I thought that's what being a father meant. But real love isn't one-sided. Real family doesn't call you a burden when you're at your weakest. Real respect doesn't disappear the moment you stop being useful. They taught me that. In the cruelest way possible, they taught me that. And once you learn that lesson, you can't unlearn it. A week after the surgery, I was home. The private nurse I'd hired was incredible. Professional, kind, attentive, everything my own family should have been. My daughter showed up at my door, unannounced, uninvited. I opened it and found her standing there, tears streaming down her face. Dad, please, we need to talk. I didn't let her in. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. What do you want? I asked. I want to apologize. I want to explain. Explain what? I cut her off. Explain why you let your husband call me a burden while I was lying in a hospital bed. Explain why you didn't say a single word to defend me. Explain why the only time you call me now is when the money stops. She flinched. It's not like that. Then what's it like? I demanded. Tell me, make me understand. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, but nothing came out. Because there was no explanation, no justification, no excuse good enough. That's what I thought, I said, and I closed the door. She knocked for a few more minutes, crying, begging, but I didn't open it. I'd spent my whole life opening doors for her. This time, she could figure it out on her own. The son-in-law tried a different approach. He sent an email, a long, rambling email about how misunderstandings happen and how family is supposed to forgive and how holding grudges is unhealthy. He didn't apologize, not once in that entire email. He just wanted the money back. I deleted it without responding. Then he tried showing up at my house. I didn't answer the door. Then he tried calling from different numbers. I blocked every single one. Finally, he sent a text that said, "Fine, you want to throw away your family over this? Go ahead, but you're going to regret it." I read it and I laughed. Because the truth was, I didn't feel like I was throwing away my family. I felt like I was finally waking up from a nightmare where I'd been convinced that being used, disrespected, and dismissed was somehow normal, somehow acceptable. It wasn't. And I was done pretending it was. Now you might be wondering, did I ever forgive them? Did we ever reconcile? I'll get to that, but first, let me tell you what happened in the months after I cut them off. The payment stopping wasn't just an inconvenience for them. It was a disaster. See, I'd been covering their house payment, not the whole thing, but enough that without it, they were in trouble. I'd been covering their car payment, both cars, actually. I'd been covering their credit card bills, the ones they'd racked up maintaining their lifestyle. Without my money, the house of cards collapsed. Within 2 months, they were behind on the mortgage. I heard through a mutual friend that they'd tried to refinance but couldn't get approved because their debt-to-income ratio was too high. The cars repossessed, both of them. The credit cards defaulted. And the son-in-law's reaction, he blamed me, of course he did. He told people I was vindictive, cruel, that I'd abandoned my own daughter out of spite. But the people who mattered, the people who actually knew me, they knew the truth. They knew I'd been supporting them for years. They knew I'd been taken advantage of. And slowly, quietly, those people started reaching out to me, telling me I'd done the right thing, telling me I deserved better. And you know what? They were right. My daughter tried a few more times to reach out. Each time, her approach was different. First, it was guilt. Dad, I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Then it was manipulation. What would Mom think if she saw you treating me like this? My wife passed years ago, and bringing her into this was a low blow I didn't forgive easily. Then it was bargaining. If you just help us this one time, I promise things will be different. But I held firm, because I'd learned something important. People don't change because you give them another chance. They change because they face consequences. And they were finally facing consequences. 6 months after the surgery, I got a letter, not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter from my daughter. It was different from everything else she'd sent. No excuses, no justifications, just raw, honest pain. She wrote about how losing my support had forced them to face reality, how they'd been living beyond their means for years, how she'd been too afraid to admit it because admitting it meant admitting she'd failed. She wrote about how the son-in-law had changed, how the stress of losing everything had either broken him or humbled him. She wasn't sure which yet. She wrote about how much she missed me, not my money, me. And she wrote something that hit me harder than anything else. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, Dad. I don't know if I deserve it, but I need you to know that I finally understand what I lost, and it wasn't the money. I read that letter 3 times, and then I put it in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. Because here's the thing about being a father, even when your kids break your heart, even when they betray you, even when they prove they're not who you thought they were, you still love them. I hated that I loved her. I hated that part of me wanted to believe she meant what she wrote. I hated that I was even considering giving her another chance. But I was. I waited another month, just to be sure, just to see if the letter was genuine or just another manipulation tactic. And then I called her. She answered on the first ring. Dad. Her voice was shaking. I got your letter, I said. Silence, then quietly, and I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if things can ever go back to the way they were, but I'm willing to talk, just talk, no promises. She started crying. Thank you, Dad, that's all I'm asking for. We met for coffee a week later, just the two of us, no son-in-law. It was awkward, painful. There were long silences where neither of us knew what to say. But it was honest. For the first time in years, it was honest. She didn't ask for money. She didn't make excuses. She just talked about how hard the past few months had been and how much she'd learned about herself. And I listened. I didn't forgive her that day. I didn't tell her everything was fine, because it wasn't. But it was a start. Now 7 months later, we're still rebuilding, slowly, carefully. She's working 2 jobs now, actually working, not pretending to while living off my money. The son-in-law, we don't talk. I've made it clear that he's not welcome in my life. If she wants a relationship with me, it's on her to manage that boundary. She's doing it, not perfectly, but she's trying. And as for me, I've learned something important, something I wish I'd learned years ago. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. Support without respect isn't support, it's servitude. And family that only shows up when they need something isn't family, it's a transaction. I spent decades giving everything I had to the people I loved, thinking that's what made me a good father, a good man. But I was wrong. Being a good father doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. It means teaching your kids to stand on their own, to respect the people who help them, to understand that love is a two-way street. I failed at that. I gave them everything without teaching them the value of anything. And they failed me. They took and took and took until I had nothing left to give, and then they called me a burden for having the audacity to need something in return. But here's what they didn't count on. I'm not a burden, I never was. I'm a man who built something from nothing, who worked until his hands bled, who provided for his family without complaint. And the day I stopped providing for people who didn't appreciate it, that wasn't me giving up. That was me finally standing up for myself. So let me ask you something. If you've made it this far, if you've listened to this whole story, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven them immediately? Would you have held the line like I did? Would you have cut them off completely and never looked back? Drop a comment and let me know, because I need to hear from people who understand, people who have been taken for granted, people who have had to make the impossible choice between being loved and being respected. And if this story resonated with you, do me one more favor, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, because there's more to this story. There are things I haven't told you yet. Like what I decided to do with my will after all this happened. Like what the son-in-law did when he found out. Like the conversation I had with my daughter when she realized that cutting off the money wasn't the worst consequence I'd planned. They thought losing my financial help was the worst part. They thought that was my final move. They had no idea what I decided about my future after that day in the hospital. But you'll find out soon. Because this story, it's not over yet. Not by a long shot. Let me take you back to that hospital room one more time, because there's something I haven't told you yet, something I couldn't bring myself to say until now. When the son-in-law called me a burden, when my daughter stood there silent, when I realized that I meant nothing to them beyond a bank account, something broke inside me that I don't think will ever fully heal. I'm 67 years old. I've faced down angry contractors twice my size. I've negotiated deals that would have bankrupted me if I'd blinked. I've buried the woman I loved and woke up the next day because I had a daughter who needed me. I thought I was tough, unbreakable. But lying in that hospital bed, in pain, vulnerable, watching the two people I'd sacrificed everything for treat me like an inconvenience, that broke me in a way I didn't know was possible. You want to know what the worst part was? It wasn't the words. It wasn't even the lack of defense from my daughter. It was the look in the son-in-law's eyes, the complete absence of guilt, the entitlement, the certainty that he was right to feel annoyed by my existence. He didn't see a man who'd built a life, who'd provided for his family, who'd been there for every milestone and every crisis. He saw an obstacle, an inconvenience, a burden. And my daughter, she saw nothing, because she couldn't even be bothered to look at me. The night after they left, I couldn't sleep. The pain medication made me drowsy, but every time I started to drift off, I'd jolt awake with the words echoing in my head. You're a burden. We have our own lives. Over and over, like a sick mantra. The nurse came in around midnight to check my vitals. She must have seen something in my face because she asked if I was okay. I almost said yes, almost gave her the polite deflection I'd been giving everyone my whole life. But instead, I said, my daughter and her husband were here earlier. They made it very clear they didn't want to be. She paused, the blood pressure cuff half inflated on my arm. I'm sorry, she said. And the thing was, she actually sounded like she meant it. Me too, I replied. She finished taking my vitals in silence, but before she left, she turned back. For what it's worth, she said, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen a lot of families in this hospital, and the ones who complain the most about being here are usually the ones who have been given the most. I've thought about that a lot in the months since, because she was right. The people who appreciate what they have don't complain when it's time to give back. They show up. They're grateful for the opportunity to support someone who supported them. The people who take everything for granted, they're the ones who whine about inconvenience, who check their watches, who call you a burden. My daughter and her husband had been given everything, and they'd learned to appreciate nothing. That was my failure as much as it was theirs. When I got home from the hospital, driven by the private nurse I'd hired, not my family, I walked through my house and really looked at it for the first time in years. It's not a mansion, it's not even particularly fancy, but it's mine, paid off, every square inch of it earned through sweat and sacrifice. I walked past the photos on the wall, my daughter at every age, graduation photos, family vacations, her wedding day, where I'd walked her down the aisle with tears in my eyes, so proud of the woman she'd become. I stopped at that photo, really looked at it. She'd been so happy that day, so full of hope and love and excitement about the future. Where had that girl gone? When had she turned into someone who could watch her father be insulted and say nothing? I took the photo off the wall, not to throw it away, just to put it in a drawer, because I couldn't look at it anymore without feeling the knife twist in my chest. The private nurse, whose name was Loretta, stayed with me for 2 weeks. She was probably in her 50s, professional, kind without being patronizing. One morning, while she was helping me change the bandages from the surgery, she asked, "Do you have family coming to help once I'm gone?" I didn't answer right away. "I have a daughter," I finally said, "but she won't be coming." Loretta didn't push, she just nodded and continued her work. But later that day, while I was resting, she brought me tea and sat down in the chair across from me. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. I nodded. "I had a patient once, older gentleman like yourself, successful, independent, proud. He'd supported his kids their entire lives, put them through school, helped with their homes, gave them everything." She paused, staring into her own cup of tea. "When he got sick, really sick, none of them came. They were too busy. They had their own lives. He died alone in a hospital room with only me and one other nurse there." My chest tightened. "But here's the thing," she continued. "A week after he died, they were all at the lawyer's office, fighting over his estate, fighting over money they'd never had to earn, money they felt entitled to just because they existed." She looked up at me. "Don't let that be you, Franklin. Don't wait until you're gone to make sure the people who actually care about you are the ones who benefit from what you've built." That conversation planted a seed that would eventually grow into a decision that would change everything. I mentioned earlier that I'd cut off their financial support, but what I haven't told you yet is how deep that support actually went. It wasn't just monthly transfers or emergency money, it was everything. I'd co-signed on their mortgage, which meant when they stopped paying, the bank came after me too. I'd bought their cars outright and put them in my name to help their credit, which meant when they defaulted on insurance, I was liable. I'd opened a credit card for emergencies with my name as the primary holder. They'd maxed it out within 6 months. For years, I'd been so tangled up in their financial life that untangling it felt like pulling teeth. My teeth. When I finally sat down with my accountant after the surgery to figure out exactly how much I'd given them, the number made me sick. $237,000. Over the course of 8 years, I'd given them $250,000. And for what? So the son-in-law could drive a car he couldn't afford, so they could live in a house that was beyond their means, so they could maintain the illusion of success while accomplishing nothing. My accountant, a woman named Rita who'd been managing my money for 20 years, looked at me over her glasses. "Franklin, with all due respect, what the hell were you thinking?" I didn't have an answer. "I was trying to help," I finally said. "Help?" She leaned back in her chair. "You weren't helping them, you were enabling them. There's a difference." She was right, of course she was right. But admitting that meant admitting I'd been a fool, and that was a hard pill to swallow. Rita helped me create a plan to extract myself from their financial entanglements. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but slowly, methodically, we untangled every thread. I refinanced the mortgage into their names only. They had to qualify on their own, which they barely did, and only with a much higher interest rate. I transferred the car titles to them. They immediately traded them in for cheaper, older models because they couldn't afford the insurance. I closed the joint credit card and took the hit to my credit score to keep them from dragging me down further. Every single step felt like cutting off a limb, not because I wanted to keep supporting them, but because it was tangible proof of how thoroughly I'd let myself be used. And through all of it, the calls kept coming, the voicemails, the emails. But the tone had shifted. At first it was panic, then anger, then bargaining. My daughter sent me texts like, "Dad, please, we're going to lose the house." The son-in-law sent emails that were thinly veiled threats about how family doesn't abandon family and how you'll regret this. But I didn't respond, not to any of it. Because every word they sent just proved my point. They didn't miss me, they missed my wallet. Around month 3 of the silence, something unexpected happened. My daughter's best friend, a woman named Bethany who I'd known since she was a teenager, reached out to me. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just to talk. I was hesitant. I assumed my daughter had sent her, that this was another manipulation tactic. But Bethany had always been good to me, respectful, kind, so I agreed. We met at a cafe downtown. She showed up looking uncomfortable, wringing her hands. "I'm not here on behalf of your daughter," she said immediately. "I just wanted you to know what's happening, because I think you deserve to know the truth." I listened. She told me that my daughter was a mess, that the financial collapse had caused huge fights between her and her husband, that he was blaming her for ruining things with me. "She's working 2 jobs now," Bethany said. "She's exhausted, she's stressed, but Franklin, I think she's finally starting to understand what she lost." "It's too late for understanding," I said quietly. "The time for understanding was when I was lying in a hospital bed." Bethany nodded. "I know, and I told her that. I told her she screwed up in a way that might not be fixable, but I also wanted you to know that she's not the same person she was 3 months ago." "People don't change in 3 months," I said. "Maybe not," Bethany agreed, "but suffering can wake people up, and she's suffering." I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to care that she was suffering, because where was her concern for my suffering when I needed her? But I'm human, and she's still my daughter, so part of me, a small, stubborn part that I hated, felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it far down the road. Month 4 brought a development I didn't expect. The son-in-law left. According to Bethany, who called to tell me, he'd packed his things one night and just left. No warning, no explanation beyond a note that said he couldn't do this anymore. My daughter was alone. And I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt something, but it wasn't sympathy, it was vindication. Because the man who'd called me a burden, who'd acted like my existence was an inconvenience, had just proven exactly what kind of man he was. When things got hard, he ran, he didn't fight, he didn't support, he didn't stand by the woman he'd promised to love through better or worse. He abandoned her, just like they'd abandoned me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter called me that night, the first time she'd called in months that I actually answered. "Dad," her voice was wrecked, raw from crying. I heard, I said. I'm sorry. Are you? She asked. There was no accusation in her voice, just genuine curiosity. I thought about it, really thought about it. I'm sorry you're hurting, I said carefully, but I'm not sorry he's gone. Silence on the other end. He was never good enough for you, I continued. I knew it from the beginning, but you loved him, so I kept my mouth shut. I supported you. I helped you build a life with him, even though everything in me screamed that he was wrong for you. I know, she whispered. Do you? I asked. Because I'm not sure you do. I'm not sure you understand how many times I bit my tongue, how many times I wrote checks to cover his failures, how many times I smiled and nodded while he made decisions that I knew would hurt you. She was crying now. I could hear it. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, and I meant it. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you stood there and let him call me a burden. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you chose him over me when it mattered. I know, she sobbed. I know, and I hate myself for it. Every single day I hate myself for it. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, to fall back into the role of the supportive father who fixes everything. But I couldn't, not this time. You should hate yourself for it, I said quietly, because it was unforgivable, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget it. I understand, she said, but Dad, even if you never forgive me, I need you to know something. What? You were right about him, about all of it, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm not the person I was that day in the hospital, even if you never believe me. We talked for another hour that night. She didn't ask for money, she didn't ask for help. She just talked about what she'd learned, about the jobs she was working, about the therapy she'd started. And for the first time in months, I felt something crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. Not crumble, just crack. It was a start. Here's where I need to tell you about the will, because that's the part of this story that changes everything. After the surgery, after I cut them off, after I started really examining my life, I called my lawyer. His name is Gerald. We'd worked together for years on business contracts and estate planning. I want to change my will, I told him. Okay, he said, what changes are you thinking? I want my daughter removed as the primary beneficiary. Silence on the other end. Franklin, he said carefully, I have to ask, is this a decision you're making out of anger? Because making permanent legal changes in the heat of emotion is something people often regret. It's not anger, I said, though that wasn't entirely true. It's clarity. I explained everything, the surgery, the insult, the years of financial support, the entitled son-in-law, the silent daughter. Gerald listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, what do you want to do instead? I want the bulk of my estate to go to charity, educational scholarships for kids who come from nothing, like I did. I want to leave something for my daughter, but not enough to enable her, just enough to help if she's actually worked to build something on her own. How much are we talking? 10% of the estate goes to her, 90% goes to the scholarship fund. Gerald let out a low whistle. That's a significant change. Your estate is worth. I know what it's worth, I cut him off, and I know exactly what I'm doing. We drew up the new will, I signed it, it was official. And I didn't tell anyone. Not my daughter, not her husband before he left, not Bethany, no one. It was my secret, my power move, my final statement about what happens when you take people for granted. But here's where things get complicated. After my daughter and I started talking again, after months of slow, painful rebuilding, I started to question the will. Not because she asked me to, she still didn't know about it. But because I saw genuine change in her. She wasn't perfect, she still made mistakes, but she was trying. She'd gotten a degree in accounting and was building an actual career instead of coasting on my money. She'd started volunteering at a community center, working with at-risk kids. She'd cut all contact with her ex-husband and filed for divorce. She was becoming someone I could be proud of again. And that terrified me. Because if I changed the will back, was I just rewarding her for doing what she should have been doing all along? Was I teaching her that she could betray me and still get everything if she just waited long enough? Or was I punishing her forever for one terrible moment? Was I being vindictive instead of wise? I didn't have an answer. 8 months after the surgery, my daughter invited me to dinner at her apartment. It was small, tiny compared to the house she'd lived in before, but it was clean, organized, and most importantly, it was hers, paid for by her own money. She cooked, not fancy but good, honest food. We ate in comfortable silence for a while before she finally spoke. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about me choosing him over you. I put down my fork. I want you to understand something, she continued. It wasn't that I chose him, it was that I was terrified. Of what? Of admitting that my marriage was failing, that I'd made a mistake, that the life I'd built was fake. She looked down at her plate. It's easier to be angry at someone for pointing out the truth than to face the truth itself. So you sacrificed me to avoid facing reality. Yes, she said simply, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. We talked for hours that night, really talked, about her marriage, about my enabling, about the patterns we'd both fallen into. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. And when I left that night, I called Gerald. I want to revise the will again, I said. The new will wasn't a complete reversal. I didn't give her everything back. But I increased her portion to 40%. The scholarship fund still got 60%. It felt fair, balanced. She'd learned, she'd grown, she deserved another chance. But not a free pass. I still haven't told her about any of this. Maybe I never will. Maybe the will is something she'll only learn about when I'm gone. But I sleep better now knowing that if something happens to me, my money will go to people who appreciate it, people who need it, people who will use it to build something instead of maintaining a facade. That's my legacy now, not just what I built, but what I taught my daughter about the cost of taking people for granted. So let me bring this back to you, because if you've stuck with me this far, I need to know something. Do you think I did the right thing, cutting them off, changing the will, or should I have forgiven them immediately, given them chance after chance without consequences? Drop a comment, tell me your story, tell me if you've ever been in a position where you had to choose between being loved and being respected. Because here's what I've learned, you can't have one without the other. Love without respect is just use, and respect without love is empty. But when you find both, when you find people who actually value you for who you are, not what you provide, that's worth protecting, even if it means walking away from people you thought you'd never lose. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth is, there are thousands of people out there being taken for granted right now, being called burdens by the people they've sacrificed everything for. And maybe, just maybe, hearing this story will give them the courage to stand up for themselves too. This is Franklin Moore, and I'm not a burden. I'm a survivor. And so are you.